Chapter 9, Changed. At the end of the Civil War, in 1865, slavery was abolished in the United States. But black people soon found that being free did not mean that they were treated the same way that white people were. Even 100 years later, African Americans were not seen as equal and did not have the same rights as whites. This was especially true in the South, where the two races lived separately. Notice here is a water fountain for white people, and here is a different water fountain for colored people or black people. This way of life is called segregation. To segregate people means to keep them apart. Blacks were not allowed to buy houses in white neighborhoods. They were not allowed to attend white schools, eat in white restaurants, stay at white hotels, or go to white laundromats. Signs outside said, "For whites only." Then, in the 1950s and 1960s, great changes came through the civil rights movement. African Americans united in their demand for equality under such leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. Just like slavery had been outlawed a century earlier, segregation was now made illegal. A milestone came in 1965 with the Voting Rights Act. It guaranteed African Americans the right to cast votes and thus elect leaders who would represent their interests and rights. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. The son of a minister, King became a minister and a civil rights activist. Through marches and peaceful protests, he helped end segregation in the South. He gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech in August of 1963 at a huge march in Washington, D.C. King's dream was for a country where blacks and whites lived together as equals. Here's a well-known line from it. "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." On April 4th, 1968, he was shot and killed in Memphis, Tennessee. He is still remembered as one of the greatest African American leaders in history. Back to our story. Will prejudice against black people ever disappear completely? That is a question that can't really be answered. Runaway slaves didn't think about being treated the same way as white people. All they wanted was to be free. Could Henry Box Brown or Harriet Tubman ever have imagined that in 2008 a black man would be elected president of the United States? Or that he would have a wife whose ancestors had once been slaves in the Deep South? Change may often seem to come too slowly, but in time, it does come. I love that. There's always hope. So remember, in the back of the book, there's a timeline to check out of all the things that we talked about. And then there's a list of other books that you might be interested in reading if you liked this one. The What Was series also has a Who Was series, and there might be some who's that you recognize from this story. I hope you enjoyed What Was the Underground Railroad?